Good evening, everybody. This is Chuck Horton from Double Cross Radio along with Drew Lamb, and we're coming to you live from the state of Jefferson tonight. We're bringing you another jam-packed episode of Secession as we explore all the wonderful things that the state of Jefferson is and the Jefferson Republican will be. And since we are there, I thought we should start out tonight talking about the upcoming concert we're going to have. Drew, you were out selling some tickets today. You want to bring everybody up to date on what the situation is there?
Yeah, Gary Lake and I hit the streets today, and we started off in the Jacksonville area and just approached people and went into businesses, and we had a very good response. I was really pleased. People were interested in this, and when we explained the Jefferson Republic to them, they were receptive to it. I spoke with an elderly woman in one of the shops who got very excited about it and was asking me the difference between the Republic and the state of Jefferson. And I explained to her how this was going to restore the constitutional republic and return the government to the control of the people. And she goes, "Oh, I want to move to Jefferson Republic if that happens." and then her supervisor was very interested in it as well, and people that we met on the streets were interested. And I sold some tickets today, and we need to sell some more. So if you guys want to go, this is on March 22nd at the Siskiyou County Fairgrounds in Yreka, California, soon to be Yreka Jefferson Republic. And you could go to jeffersonrepublic.org to purchase tickets online, or you could contact us through our Double Cross Radio Facebook page via email and get in touch with myself or Chuck or Kevin. And if you're down in the Northern California area, we could put you in touch with some folks down there where you could get tickets. Also in Ashland, Oregon, you can purchase tickets at Abenito Salon at 50 North 3rd Street in Ashland. And we'll have some additional locations hopefully soon, and those will be announced on the Jefferson Republic's Facebook page and on the website. And so we are looking for more volunteers to circulate flyers, and it's very helpful if you talk to your friends about this. Check out the website, jeffersonrepublic.org, and get up to speed on what this is all about. And what we're trying to do is help the people in Siskiyou County learn about the Jefferson Republic, so when they vote on this in June, they will know the difference between the Jefferson Republic and the state of Jefferson. They don't get to vote on the state of Jefferson. That's going to be in the hands of the California Congress and the U.S. Senate, and it's really out of the control of the people. This would replace the existing government with a new government framework. And so they're going to be voting on this, and we're having this concert with Jordan Page on March 22nd, and we are trying to raise funds to get some mailers out to the folks in Siskiyou County, and we're planning to have a really good time listening to Jordan's music. Jordan did the song for our intro bumper music, and he's toured with Ron Paul and Stuart Rhodes and the Oath Keepers and Judge Andrew Napolitano. He's been on our show at least 2 times.
3 times now.
3 times now. And so we're expecting to have a really great show and a good turnout. I'm just really pleased with the response so far. But we need to do a really big push this weekend. So any of you guys in Southern Oregon or Northern California that want to help, get in touch with us.
Yeah, and I'm going to interrupt you for just a second, and I'm going to make this a plea. So far, Drew and Gary are doing a lot of the ticket selling on their own, and I've been kind of busy. But I have this weekend mostly free. I think Sunday my wife is going to put a chain around my leg. But I'm going to try and help on Saturday if I can. And I think anybody out there that wants to help in this effort, this is one way you can really help. You go out, and this is a great way to engage people in conversation, to talk about the concepts of liberty, freedom, to, say, well, if you really want to do something that's proactive and you're doing something to advance the cause of liberty, this is your chance. And at the same time, if this does come about, and I have a good feeling about this whole thing. I think that the voting population in Siskiyou County is small enough that, it's possible we can get to enough people that this could really fly. They could win this election and they could become an independent republic, and we could see this reestablishment of freedom. And Drew and I are probably going to have to be in a foot race to beat that lady to Siskiyou County if this happens, because I'm moving the day it starts.
Same here.
And this won't happen if we don't. There's not going to be this. I tell you, every day the economic news gets worse and worse and worse, and there's not going to be any sanctuary for anybody to move to if we don't get behind this. This is a big chance for us to have a bug out republic to go to, not just a cabin up in the woods, but a regular civilization that's already established with infrastructure in place, and we can reestablish an economy and everything else. So you guys that are regular listeners, you heard the stuff about Hong Kong and what a fabulous economy they have and what a high standard of living they have and how well educated they are and how they have such longer life expectancy and better health. And that could all be for, all you got to do is establish freedom and you could have the same thing. And that's all it's going to take. We just, we got to get going. And I see Colby out there say, no, we must bring it here. Well, Colby, if we're going to bring it here, we have to establish it. So there's a lot of people in Jackson County that are rather wary of this, and you're going to have to show them how it works first, and then they'll want to be a part of it, and then you can get them to join it. And
Jackson County. I agree. I think that we support the people of Siskiyou County and get that rolling, and then Siskiyou County can be the example, the model. And then other people can run with it and roll it out in their county if they so desire. And they definitely have the support and the advice of the folks that have been working on this for Siskiyou County already. And
Colby brought up a good point here. Colleen Roberts is running for county commissioner. She's very receptive to this. And that's what we need. We need to vote for people. You need to be asking those candidates that are running for those offices what they think about the Republic of Jefferson.
I hope she supports it.
She does. I talked to her. She does.
I have her sign in my front yard right now.
Yeah. And, if you vote, if you're not sure you want to vote for her, ask her opponent. I think she's running against, what's his name? He's, I don't know. I can't remember. But I wasn't really too concerned because she's the one I was going to vote for. But her opponent, I'm not so sure he's for that. I think he wants to stay in Oregon. He wants things to kind of go as they are. He's kind of an establishment guy. And so he's probably not going to, he's going to be more of the same, I think. So she's definitely in favor of this. And that's just how you make progress. You do it one step at a time. You can't, Siskiyou County, they're way ahead of where we are. We're not even where they were maybe 2006. We have a lot of work to do in Jackson County, but this will speed it up if they get started, and it's going to grab everybody's attention. It's going to make people more receptive to listening to the message of freedom and liberty, and especially if Siskiyou County starts to become as prosperous as it could be. And so this is really, really important. So if you guys have time on Saturday and you want to go out and help us pass out flyers and sell tickets and engage people and, kind of start talking up this freedom thing about how great it would be to have freedom reestablished in the western United States. Miner Dave's in there. His mining claim is only 7 miles from the borders. Maybe they can make a little isthmus in there that'll include your mining claim, Dave. I don't know. I don't know if Jackson County will cede that properties, but they're not using it, so maybe they will.
So, Miner Dave, are you for State of Jefferson or Jefferson Republic? I think I already know the answer to that question. I bet that Miner Dave is for the Jefferson Republic. Well, we'll have to see what his response is.
Yeah. So, anyway, I can't say enough about this. I'm looking forward to getting to see my good friend Jordan Page again. I know there'll be a lot of people that want to talk to him, so that'll be kind of, I'll have to share him with everybody. I could sit down and talk to that guy for hours. He is just the most interesting person. He's got so many great experiences, and he's met so many neat people in his life. And he's one of the world's most interesting people. There's just all there is to it. And just you guys will realize that when you go and you see him in concert. He is a real person. There's nothing fake about him. He's a very talented guitar player. He's a good singer. He's a great songwriter. And you will be just blown away by what a talent he is. Okay, and if Gary, if you're listening tonight and you want to call in about an hour or so, we can go over this again and you can give us some further updates if you want to today. We have material, but this isn't like like a couple of weeks ago when we had 6 hours worth of stuff to go through in 2 hours. So the next thing I want to talk about is what we were originally going to start the show with. Drew, do you remember this a couple of weeks ago when you were talking about how much you hated regulations and you were just kind of ranting about that?
Yeah, that's a typical rant of mine.
Well, I think a lot of people could identify with that. And you remember that comment I made that I'd read this somewhere while I was reading something else, research for something else I was doing. It was a column I was writing, and so it was that for every government bureaucrat that lost his job, there'd be 100 jobs created.
Yes.
Well, I just kept thinking about that, and I'd actually had mentioned it to Dennis Linthicum also, who's running for Congress in the 2nd Congressional District, and he's another person that we support. And by the way, we don't support these people because of the party they're in. We support them because they're for liberty and freedom, and that's our I guess our litmus test. We don't support the people that are statists, even if they have an R by their name. So anyway, I talked to him about it, and I said, gosh, I should look that up, because there's more than just one sentence about that report. There's probably a lot more in that. And I couldn't find the original article I was reading, but I thought, with the internet, how hard is this to find it? So I just put out 100 jobs created for one government job lost, and boom, there it was. It came right up on the search engine. I couldn't believe how easy that was. And so I started reading this study, and I right off the bat, I remember when we had Robert Smith and Richard Ochoa on, and they were talking about their project of trying to calculate the cost of regulation. And they were going by the things that they knew about in their own lives and their business and things that they did. And I got to tell you, guys, somebody beat you to it, and it's already been done. And it's a little bit hard to read. This is not an easy read. This is a professional paper written for economists. They have a summary, which is regular. I mean, that's not in jargon speech. But they explain how all their mathematical equations work, how they collected their data, and that stuff that stuff will put you to sleep. So, if you want to go to this, study, you can find it. We'll post a link later on if you want to go, but I'm going to go through it pretty well with some of the high points, and trust me, it's not easy to read. It wasn't easy. So we'll just leave it at that. Okay, this is what the study found, and Drew, you can jump in here anytime you want to comment on this, but this is going through some of the highlights that they had. They said that even a very small reduction in the regulatory budget, that would be about, in their case, about 5%, which would amount to $2.8 billion. So if they just reduce their budget by that much, it was estimated to result in about a $75 billion expansion of the private sector GDP for every year into the future. And that would also include an increase in employment of about 1.2 million jobs annually. That's every year. There would be that many more jobs created every year. So it's a compounding thing. And then those jobs will actually create more jobs as they do, because it's just just how it works. It's not really a multiplier effect. It's just that as people get more productive, they have more resources to spend, and because they're getting more income, and that produces more jobs too. They don't always spend all the income that they make. Although some people do, I guess. And I was just blown away. That was just a 5% reduction in the budget of the regulatory agencies in Washington, D.C. Just a 5% reduction would create 1.2 million jobs every year from now on. That's pretty amazing. That was the first thing. Drew, do you have any comments?
Well, we could explain a little bit on the reasons behind that, because when you have regulations, especially like government regulations that affect businesses or particular industries, there's a heavy cost to comply with those regulations. And so, of course, that has to be offset in some way. Usually it can't be recovered by raising prices, and it typically means that people are going to lose jobs and the business isn't going to be as successful. But those regulations have to be administered in some way. So the government has to hire more people. And so that they have to increase taxes, in order to cover that cost, or print more money, which is also a tax. What's that? Or
borrow from the future.
Exactly. But then they're inflating the dollars, which is an invisible tax, but a tax nevertheless. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, you have people. So some jobs were created. However, they're not productive jobs. They don't produce anything. Actually, they're destructive jobs. They're actually hurting the production within the private sector. And so you've got this huge drag on the economy just from regulation.
Yeah, and I'm also going to point out one of the reasons. This is kind of a cynical view. I believe it to be true, though, or I wouldn't say it. But one of the reasons why regulations are put in place in the first place is large corporations have these regulations. They actually write the regulations, and they have them put in because they have their former employees working in these regulatory agencies, and they have them institute those, and they have the weight of law. They're the same as the law, but there's nobody ever votes on it. They're just administrative law, and they have the weight of a regular law that comes out of Congress. And they put these regulations in not to keep the public safe or anything else. They put these regulations in to keep their competition down. And as we were told time and time again by people who are, I guess, propagandists for different organizations, most of the jobs in this country are created by small businesses, startup businesses, people that are creating new businesses that are, new products and this and that. Well, if those products have to be approved, and if the cost of complying to all these things is so great that there's going to require a larger investment from people, it's going to have a chilling effect on the creation of those jobs. And so that's where all those jobs come from. They're stifling competition through these regulations, and I think they're doing it on purpose. It's a purposeful plan, and it's working very well. I mean, the big corporations are getting bigger, and the small corporations are just dying on the vine. So that was the first point. They didn't go into what they thought the reasons were. They just said this is what their research concluded. And I think that if anything, their conclusions are very conservative. And I don't mean that in a political sense. I mean that I think that the effects would be much greater than what they state. And that's just because I think that there would be a lot more people out there rushing to fill in these voids. That this opportunity would be out there, and be a lot more people trying to take advantage of that. I think we'd probably have more immigration in this country because we'd have a job shortage. We wouldn't have enough people to fill the jobs that are being created. There would be that kind of prosperity. So we'd want to have a more open immigration policy to bring in more people to work and all these jobs that we're going to have. So that was just the first point. And they said, conversely, for every $1 million in regulatory costs, now that's for every $1 million that the government spends in regulatory costs, it costs the economy 420 private sector jobs. So, and and they found out, I'm going to say this is, well, I'll save it for when it comes up. But just think of this now. This isn't for total government spending, although you could make a case for there's every dollar the government spends is, in a sense, breaking a window. And to go to Bastiat's broken window fallacy, that they have to take it away from somebody else first, and that's going to start to limit the production of new jobs. So every dollar that they spend costs the private sector 420 jobs. Okay. Now, so point number 3, since the start of the Depression, we find ourselves, and they wrote this the start of the Depression, they put it as December 2007. I actually think it started a little before that, but they have different ways of defining that, and it probably hit in different sections or regions of the country sooner than others. I think Southern Oregon, it was hitting in the late summer, early fall. It was starting to hit. I could really sense that at my store. It was just, and I think you could see it that the real estate market was really tapering off at that time. So they say, from that time when it started to the time of the report, when this report was published in April 2011, Americans have seen a 2% decline in the wages and salaries, while federal spending has increased by 23%. And $4 trillion, that's 50% increase, has been added to our national debt. So that was in just less than 4 years, about 3.5 years. 2% decline in wages and salaries. They're making a little less money. Federal spending increased by 23%, though, during that time. So they didn't feel any pain. And $4 trillion added to national debt. We don't know how much money was created by the Federal Reserve because they won't let us do a full audit. But they created a ton of money, and they basically, the foreign central banks in Europe that had invested heavily in these toxic mortgage assets, they needed to be bailed out too, and so the Federal Reserve just inflated or debased our money supply to save their asses. And that's means all the money you hold is cash, or your wages that you get from your job, and all that was devalued almost overnight. And like I said, we don't know exactly how much they printed up. And they said they didn't print any money, and technically that's probably true. They created them digitally on computers. They just added zeros to the numbers, and that's how they did it. Point number 4. On January 18th, 2011, the President called for a study that would provide those involved with the budget a cost-benefit ratio with which to help their efforts to cut costs. And when I read this, I said, all I could think of was, seriously? They need a study? They're gonna spend money on a study to find out where money's being wasted. I have a good place to start. How about studies that are looking into ways they can save more money? I think they put that in there so that it wouldn't seem like it was very critical of the president. I really did. They wanted to give him some positive credibility or something, but that was about the most bonehead thing I could ever think of to do. Because these are economists, they didn't put that in there for comic relief, even though it got a chuckle out of me. Anyway, then they also pointed out, this is point number 5, a study that was conducted in 2010 found that the regulations, that's all the regulations that come out of the government, that's regulations on food, on medicine, on business, on workplace safety, and sexual harassment, and there's so many different regulations. You can't believe how many regulations there are. They fill up whole bookcases full of regulations. Anyway, the total cost they said the annual cost was $1.75 trillion. That's a lot of money. Do you guys have any idea how much $1.75 trillion is? It's just, I can't even conceive of that. It's a stack of $100 bills that goes way, way, way up into space. That is roughly equates. Now I was using the number 315 million people in the United States. I think there's more than that. I think it's closer to maybe 320 or 330 million. But I was going to try to be conservative in this. Using that number, that's roughly $5,500 for every person in the United States on an annual basis. A family of 4, these regulations cost them $22,000 a year. That's a lot of money. Even inflated and debased money, it's still a lot of money. And if you have somebody that's working in a job where he's making, let's say he's making $40,000, you're just barely paying a little bit of income tax or something, you realize that $22,000 of his purchasing power is being robbed by regulations. Think of how much more this guy could spend for his family, to spend whatever, if he didn't have to spend the higher prices on all these products that are having to comply with these regulations. And it goes anywhere from the car you drive to the housing you live in to just things like having to have these stupid smoke detectors that never work right. The only time they ever go on is in the middle of the night when you're asleep and there's no fires in the house. I don't know. Can you guys tell that my fire alarm, my smoke detector went off recently? Can you tell? Did I kind of slip that in there? And just, I don't know. That's just a really, I will say this, smoke detectors have probably saved a lot of lives, and I probably would have one even if they weren't required. But the fact that they're required just adds more money to the cost of a house. Someone's got to pay for it. And that's just one thing. Let's see. And these regulations, they deal with pretty much every aspect of your life. And they're not all coming from the federal government. Some of them come through the state governments. Some of them come through city governments. There's a lot of work that's being taken right now, and I think they're going city by city and electric company district by electric company district. They're trying to enforce smart meters into people's lives. Just one guy, we posted a story about it on our Facebook page this week. A guy who just woke up one day and there was a smart meter on his house. He didn't ask for it. He didn't want it. It just was there. He didn't want to take it off, and they told him no, they'd have to turn off his electricity to take it off because he had to have one if he wanted electricity. So he said, take it off. And he went dark. And then he had to move all his food to his parents' house to keep it from thawing out. All the food is in the freezer. And they had a couple other things. There was no hot water in his electric water heater, but he was figuring out a way that he could just stay off the grid, and he just wasn't prepared to do it just that day. So it's going to take him a while to get back to speed. But that's kind of the kinds of things you're looking at. And regulations, these smart meters, they have these little transmitters so they can drive by and see they can actually wirelessly transmit your electric usage to a central command structure, and if they find out you're using too much electricity, they'll turn your power off for a while, or they'll shut it down so your lights go brown. And Colby's right. Every place they've done this, your cost goes way up because these meters use a lot of electricity. They're talking to all your appliances all the time to find out what you're spending, what you're using your electricity on, and so it's like running several computers continuously, just as all this. I guess it's kind of a electromagnetic radiation of some sort. It's not like a radiation like you get from radioactive stuff, but it's energy. It's pulsing through the air, and it's not good for your health and your body. Some people are really sensitive to it, and it makes them sick. So that's just something they make a regulation, and you have to have it. Boom, there you go. Okay, and this was the other point that was further down here. I wanted to go back to this one about the $1 million and the 420 private sector jobs. Point number 6, the study found that changes in the GDP and jobs as a result of changes in the regulatory budgets were symmetrical. And that is to say that the job loss and GDP decreases from a 5% increase in the regulatory budget were equal to the job gains and GDP increases from a regulatory budget decrease of 5%. So going back to the point number 2, then, for every $1 million of regulatory costs that we can cut out, we're going to gain 420 jobs. Those 420 jobs will produce a lot of tax money. Probably not $1 million in tax money, but they'll produce a lot of tax money. And I really am of this feeling that we don't need most of these regulations. I really don't think we need any of them personally, but there's probably you're going to have to do this little by little to convince people that it can be the things that should be regulated somewhat can be done so by private market concerns. We posted a video in the Facebook page today that deals with this. It's about the regulations of medicines and things. It's from the Learn Liberty site. It's a really good video. It's about 5 minutes. It's really worth your time to watch that. And it makes some of these same points that, we don't need government regulations. If there are things that should have a regulation or inspection or whatever, it can be done privately if the people demand it. And people demand to be willing to pay for it. But there'll also be uninspected, unregulated items for the people that don't want to pay for it. And those will be at a lower cost. And the marketplace will determine what is the, what's going to be the main selling item. And you just have to look at the example of, United Laboratories, or it's UL stamp. Utility Laboratories? Maybe that's what it is.
I thought it was Underwriters.
Underwriters, that's right. You're right. Underwriters Laboratories. And what they do is that every electrical appliance in this country, and it doesn't have to be, there's no law that says it has to be, but they all get inspected because nobody's going to put an electrical appliance in their store that doesn't have their stamp of approval on it, or someone else's of equivalent integrity and reputation. So if some cheap thing is coming over from China and they try to test it out and they say this is rejected, this is no good, it's going to electrocute somebody, then it doesn't get the stamp of approval and nobody wants it in their store. They cancel all their orders, say no, this wasn't approved, we don't want it. And so then China has to retool it and make it safe if they want to sell it. Well, that's all done without the government. It's all done voluntarily in the marketplace by private sector. And it works very well. It works very smoothly. It balances the two needs that you have in the marketplace of having safe products and having a quick response time. And the FDA, sometimes it takes them 20 years to approve a drug that could save 50,000 lives a year. Well, in that 20 years, 1 million people die waiting for that drug. Now, I don't know if they were going to live 20 years or not, but when you're close to death, living 6 months is a long time. So that was kind of the point of that video. And it's a really good video. I think both with this study and that video, there's one thing that is left out, and I don't know another way to say it other than say that I think sometimes things like this are left out on purpose because they don't want them to be political in nature. But reality is, when you give a government or a government entity regulatory authority and the power of government behind it, what happens is you attract criminal elements to that power because they realize that power is a safe way to accomplish their goals, and they can use the force and coercion of government to bend everything in their direction. Now, to give you an example, just in chat, C Gypsy says they seem to fast track vaccines pretty well. Well, they fast track vaccines because vaccines are made by the big pharmaceutical corporations. But if Mrs. C Gypsy were to come up with a vaccine that was terribly effective, it would take 20 years of testing and billions of dollars to pay for that testing to get that approved by the FDA if they approved it. And you only have to look at the case of Dr. Brzezinski down in Texas, where he was taking patients that were given a month, maybe 2 months to live, that had inoperable brain tumors. And these were kids with their parents had decided, well, their choices were they could have their brains fried by radiation therapy to kill the tumor. They'd be alive, but they'd just be a vegetable. Or you could have them try to have as high quality life as you can in the remaining month or two that they're going to be alive, because the treatment will likely kill them. And they had that choice, or they could try Dr. Brzezinski's cure or his therapy, which wasn't a guarantee. He had between a 30 and 70% success rate, depending on how bad a shape the patient was to start with. Like the ones that had already gone through some of the chemotherapy and radiation therapy were in pretty bad shape health-wise, and so those were more like the 30%. The ones that hadn't had any of that was closer to a 70% success rate. And he was able to have these amazing results with people that nothing else would work with. He was having higher survival rates than any other kind of cancer treatment that was known in the United States at that time. And what was the FDA's response to this? They put him in prison and tried to steal his patents. That's the kind of people that occupy these positions in government. They're criminals. They realized that he was onto something, that this is something that could be patented. This is something we can just steal these patents, we can deny them, and then we'll steal them, we'll reapply in a different form, alter them slightly, and we'll just snatch those right out from under him. And he was able to, from his jail cell, was able to get his lawyers on this and to stop them, to get out of prison, and to file a suit against them, and he's won all of his suits. And this guy, I don't know what keeps him in this country. He's a Polish man. He's a Polish immigrant. He can go back to Poland and save people's lives. He's sticking it out in Houston. He's got permission to operate in Houston. He can't bring in anybody from outside of Houston. So if you're dying and you don't live in Texas, you're out of luck. He's not going to be able to help you. But his therapy, it works. And basically he's taking a compound, a peptide that's found in horse urine, and he distills it out, and he isolates it, and he gives it to his patients. It has no side effects whatsoever. It doesn't have any effect on anybody's health. And he gives it to them in pretty high quantities. And what it does, it stimulates your immune system somehow by turning on different factors. It's kind of an epigenetic deal where it's once you have certain substances in your body, it activates certain genes that for a long time the geneticists thought this was just junk DNA, didn't have any use or purpose. Now they're realizing that was wrong. And this field of epigenetics is coming into play, and they're realizing that you really are what you eat, and by eating proper nutrition, it stimulates the various functions of your body and keeps you healthy and keeps you living longer and healthier and more productive lives. And one of the compelling, there's a movie that's of Dr. Brzezinski. It's available on YouTube, and it's about 2 hours, and I really suggest to everybody listening that you watch that. It's just an incredible movie, and when I watched it, I just was so upset and so mad. These FDA people, they're just motherfuckers. That's all there is about it. I'm glad this isn't an FCC deal on internet radio. We can say things like that. So let me turn up my microphone a little bit. I'm breaking up. So maybe that was a censorship of my foul language. But anyway, okay, back to the subject here. That these regulatory agencies, when you're taking away their money, you're taking away their power. When you're taking away the regulations, you're taking away their power. When you take away that power, you take away the corruption, you take away the graft, and you stimulate more business at the grassroots level, the small business, the innovation level, the level where people are out there, they've discovered something like Dr. Brzezinski did, and they can come out and they can do something that's going to help people's lives. There's no force making people buy this product. It's people are there that have a cancer, they want to have it cured, and if you can get to him early, I bet he has a really strong success rate with people that are diagnosed earlier than when they the patients he was getting when he was only getting 30% survival. Now, this is another thing that the pharmaceutical industry calls you a cancer survivor if you live 5 years after your treatment. All of Dr. Brzezinski's patients that made it through, the 30% that made it through, all of them have survived. They're still alive. None of them have died of medical. I mean, if they died, it was from a car accident or something. It wasn't from anything that was medical. He had a young girl that was 6 years old. Now she's married and has children. It's in the movie. It's just amazing. That's just one example, though. But in this study, they went on to say that if they could reduce the regulatory budget by 16%. Now, in the first studies, I was quoting 5%. But they said if they could reduce it by 16%, it would save enough money and create enough additional tax revenue that it would bring the budget into balance. I'll say that again. If they could reduce the regulatory budget by 16%, that's just across the board. They just tell the regulatory agencies, that's the Department of Education, Department of Energy, Department of, what is the FDA comes out of Department of Agriculture, I think. They just cut their budgets by 16%. The cost savings and the additional tax revenue, because there'd be a much stronger economy. It's going to create more jobs and more taxpayers. There's more wealth being produced. That would balance, in their estimate, it would bring the budget into balance. I think they're, again, being conservative. I think it would be a much larger impact than this. I think it would actually start a budget surplus, and we could start to pay down the debt. Because the debt is said to be $17 trillion, and that's not even true either. Because if they had to calculate the debt, I had to calculate debt when I was in business in order to not have to go to jail for fraud. I had to put down my liabilities. That means anytime I had a legal obligation to pay something, I had to include that in a liability. Even if it wasn't due that year, it was still on my negative side of my assets and my liabilities. And then we added everything up. You added the assets and you subtracted the liabilities. And then you determine your net worth, and the bank would tell you how much they could loan you based on your net worth and how well, you paid things on time in the past. And that's kind of what you had to do when you had to stock up for Christmas time. You didn't always have enough inventory, or at least when we were first starting out, we didn't. And so you always had to include your future obligations to pay. And that included, I had a lease I had signed for so many years. I had to make a payment on that lease every month, whether I was in business or not. That's an obligation that I have to pay. It just, that would be included in my liabilities. I had a loan that we took out to furnish the store. We had to buy cabinets and cases and glass shelving and computers, and there's a lot of stuff you had to buy. So there was a loan for that had to be paid back over a certain period of time. All those things are in the liabilities column. So at first, we would have some assets in those things we had to buy would have some resale value, but they depreciate pretty fast. And so, at the first couple of years, we were really not in the black at all. We had a deficit. We had a debt, but we had a good cash flow. We were selling things for more than it would cost us, and we were able to meet our expenses every month, a little bit left over, and we were able to pay off our loans a little bit early. And we established creditworthiness, and we were able to get some loans at Christmas time and beef up our inventory and had some pretty good Christmases and had some good years. Well, that's how they do it in business. Well, if the government had to do their books the way I had to do my books when I was in business, the debt would be about $200 trillion, not 17. Because they have a lot of future obligations. They take the life expectancy of people. They know how many people they have are going to be entering into the Social Security system, the Medicare system, and they have military pensions. They have they already run a socialist healthcare system known as we have here in Southern Oregon, we have a domiciliary. It's a military hospital, and they have several of those around the country. And they're kind of marginal health care, but it's paid for. Anyway, those are obligations that they have to pay for. And so it's a lot more than 17 trillion. Every time somebody tells you we have a $17 trillion debt, you just say, well, so I see you believe the lies. But anyway, we could start paying down that official debt and actually make some inroads into that. Eventually get that paid down, and then we can start taking care of putting some money aside for these future liabilities that we're going to have coming in the future, so that we don't renege on those liabilities, and eventually get to a point where maybe you can start reducing income taxes. And as we get to a point where we're flush again, we could maybe eliminate them altogether, which would be awesome. But they said in their forecast that with a 16% reduction in the regulatory budget, the U.S. government would lose 38,747 regulatory jobs. And that made me smile. They said the GDP of the U.S. would increase by $238 billion. That made me smile. They said that 3,753,524 private sector jobs would be created. That made me have an ear-to-ear smile. Big business lobbies that use these regulations to force competition out of the marketplace would now have to compete with better products at lower prices. So that I think this would have a price effect of kind of bringing more variety to the marketplace. You'd have more choice, and you'd probably have lower prices due to competition. That makes me smile. The nearly 4 million new jobs would provide billions of dollars in new tax revenue while lowering the cost of government assistance. In other words, they would no longer have to put out so much money for food stamps, unemployment insurance, welfare, and different kinds of like aid to dependent children and stuff like that, because people would be more independent. They wouldn't be depending on the government for everything. That makes me smile. Companies that had left our shores to find less burdensome business environment would flow back into this country, restoring. I'm reading this, and I think I typed it wrong. It's one of those things that spell check didn't catch because it's still a word. Restoring our economic well-being. I put or. Didn't make any sense. Anyway, there's a lot of companies that are they can't compete by having their business here in this country. The regulatory environment has got them so hogtied, they have no choice. If they're going to compete in a world market, they have to go where they can produce something at the same cost their competition is producing something. And that's just all there is. You can't sit there and just wish that those companies would be patriotic and stay here and make things for Americans, because Americans are still going to buy the things that cost them the least. And if it costs less to produce it somewhere else because they don't tie their hands behind their back before they have to start to work, then that's what's going to be the thing that's going to win in the marketplace. And the other thing you can do there is you'd have to shut off your borders to foreign competition. Well, some people might just champion that and say, hooray, but that's not a good thing. When your government's when they're telling me that I don't have a choice now to buy something from another country, I have to buy something produced here. Well, that's like giving the companies the work here. It gives them kind of a monopoly over that's using force and coercion of government again and it's going to cause the opposite of what you think it's going to cause. It always works that way. So anyway, I think there'd be a return of some of these companies. They start to build factories in this country again. We start to have more manufacturing, and that makes me smile. And after the budget's been balanced, taxes could be slowly reduced until they were no longer needed to fund government, as we would have shrunk to a manageable size because we would continue to reduce the people that are engaged in government work. Now, this study was done by the Phoenix Center for the Phoenix Center for Advanced Legal and Economic Public Policy Studies. And they're located in Washington, D.C. And they are, this is policy bulletin number 28. And you can look it up online if you don't believe me, and you can read the whole thing for yourself, although, as I told you, it's kind of dry reading. But it's there, and I think is quite interesting, the results that they got. And that's where their study lives, but as it ends. But as I said earlier, it's not really the end of the story. We've reported on this, and I'm kind of repeating what I said a few minutes ago. We reported on this a lot on this broadcast that, wherever power concentrates, it seems to draw evil to it like a magnet draws iron to it, or steel. And this study is leaving out that factor. I mean, that's like a human behavior. And this fact that the government power is, by making these regulatory agencies, having them grow and get larger and larger and larger and have more power, that's what caused businesses to go from seeing that the best way for them to attract business is to show more integrity, to show, to have better products, to be innovative, to be competitive. Then suddenly when government got big enough and strong enough that they could do a different way, they could do a less expensive way to generate larger and larger shares of the market, they could use that power of government to limit their competition. And that was, on the bottom line, that was a better way to do it. But we lost all those other good things that came with the competition. You wanted to have good public relations and you didn't want people in your company that represented you that were slimy sleazeballs. I can say that. You didn't want that. You didn't want that to be the face of your country, of your company. And now it doesn't matter. If you're an insurance company, people are being forced to buy your product by the government now. And guess who wrote the insurance? Who wrote this into the Affordable Care Act, the largely misnamed Affordable Care Act? Of course, it was the insurance companies. They wrote that bill. In today's business climate, we see the FDA, which pharmacist Ben Fuchs, he calls the FDA a fashionist organization if he ever saw one, and I agree with him. But we see the FDA putting all sorts of regulatory standards on herbs that are just things that are generated from plants. And I'm not talking about marijuana. I'm talking about just harmless herbs that somehow epigenetically stimulate parts of your body to produce results that lead to healing and recovery from illness. And they're still doing research in this, but they're seeming to think that there are definitely pathways that can explain the effects that these herbs have. But the FDA has put all sorts of regulatory standards on these herbs. And the FDA isn't writing these regulations. It's the drug companies that are losing business to these naturalists or the people that are selling these herbs. They're losing business. They want to get these people in to see a doctor and get one of their drugs prescribed for them so they can get them on that drug train. And to them, that's the profit thing. So who do you think is writing these regulations? It's not the FDA. It's kind of the drug companies, and they're using it. They're getting them to the FDA because a lot of their former employees work for the FDA now. The head of the FDA right now is the guy that used to be the CEO of Monsanto, Michael Taylor. You can look it up. It happens. It happens all the time. And the FDA is just full of people who used to work in large corporations in the industries they regulate. That's just how it works. And so a side benefit from removing this regulatory burden, we're going to see a great reduction in the graft and corruption of both business and government. And that's one thing that this study didn't bring up, which I think that's not gravy. That's going to be a huge benefit. That's going to restore rule of law to some of the things that to our nation, I guess. So that's enough of my ranting. Drew, do you have anything to add to my long drawn out deal there?
Well, you could get into how the regulations have affected the medical marijuana industry, for example. And you just look at what happens when regulations are reduced or removed, such as what's going on in Colorado. the interesting thing about that is all the tax revenue that was generated. And I'm always troubled when people petition the government to let them, engage in some sort of a vice in exchange for tax revenue. And it's amazing to see this industry explode in Colorado. But at the same time, it's going to grow government because you have all this new tax revenue going into the government, and those dollars might have gone into something else in the private sector. And so, it's not a consequence of deregulation because it is government. I mean, the government is still, doing some form of regulation. They're dealing with it kind of like how control states deal with liquor, is my understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So still you have, you still, even though something seems more permissive, there is still a consequence of the government being involved even in a lesser way in regulation. So I've just been wondering, that, all that extra tax revenue, it's not like the money was just manufactured out of thin air, because this came from people, not from the banks necessarily, not from the government. It came from people. So that's money that's going into the government coffers and not somewhere else, right? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's the broken window fallacy.
Right.
Kind of a corollary to it.
Right.
Yeah, and that's in fact I'm writing a paper on that right now. Once you figure out what that broken window fallacy really means, it's pretty easy to see every time someone starts to explain it. You say, oh yeah, I know that. I can see that. It's kind of like that movie, They Live. When he puts on those special sunglasses, you can see all the aliens.
Right. Yeah. All the yuppies are just weirdo aliens.
Yeah. That's kind of how it is.
And you can also see all the mind control, the subliminal messages in the signs and all that stuff.
Yeah. And you see all the propaganda for what it is. And
right.
But you gotta understand it first. You can't just read it and say, okay, that makes sense. If you don't really understand it and be able to apply it to different situations like this, and you're not really at that level of understanding it, you gotta increase your awareness of it. And then all of a sudden, it's just everywhere you look, you see broken windows. It seems like every time government spends $1, it has to break a window to do it.
Right. And I'd like to encourage people, if you're pushing toward deregulation and pushing for medical marijuana or recreational marijuana in your state, don't be inclined to make deals with your government. We're going, okay, well, let the private industries engage in selling it and just tax it. That's you don't want to make a deal like that. It's not a good deal. There can be adverse effects on your economy.
And that's still going to lead to black market activity because the government will want more taxation. They'll drive the price up. And just like in the South where you have moonshine liquor, because they got those taxes on the liquor got too high, so people just started making their own and selling it to avoid the tax revenuers. Well, the same thing's going to happen with marijuana. If they don't like all that revenue, and they say let's raise that tax some more. And there's a lot of do-gooders out there that think, yeah, that'll slow down the use of that marijuana product. And it won't, because then now the black market, instead of the marijuana being more expensive than it would be, they'll cut under the price of the government price, and they'll still make money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and the black market activities, unfortunately, they tend to also breed a criminal element, despite the fact that they're just trying to supply a need to the people who want it. Because they are operating outside of the law, then they kind of have to have their own protection, and kind of leads to turf wars, and it gets to be kind of a mess. It's a lot better just to have things be legally protected as private property, like like everything that you have should be, and let the people who want to use the drugs decide. And people I read kind of with a laugh, because I kind of, to me it was just hilarious, and people were just outraged that people were going into these marijuana shops in Colorado, and they were using the ATMs in there to get money off of their welfare cards to buy marijuana. And they're just outraged that would be happening. But, no one was outraged at all that money is being stolen from the taxpayers to give to these people. Where's the outrage there? I guess it's it's okay to steal, but it's not okay for them to spend that stolen money the way they want to spend it. So after being kind of heavy there, I thought maybe we should move on to some little light. I have a couple economics jokes. So I'm gonna use this moment as a time to tell these jokes. So when I'm done at the joke, I'll tell you it's the end of the joke, because with economics jokes, you don't always know when it's time to laugh. So I will tell you when it's the end. Okay, there was a group of economists, that were climbing in the Alps, or climbing mountains in the Alps. And after several hours, they became hopelessly lost. One of them realized he had a map in his backpack and got it out, and after some time of turning it upside down and sideways and everything, looking at it and checking distant landmarks, and finally looking at the sun, he said, "Okay, everybody, see that big mountain over there?" And everybody kind of nodded their head. "Yeah, we see it. Yeah." He said, "Well, according to the map, we're standing on it." Okay, that was the end of the joke. That's kind of how economists are. That's supposed to be it. According to the map, we're standing on it. Okay, what do you get when you cross an economist with a mafia godfather?
I give up.
An offer you can't understand. Okay, so those are the two jokes, and as I said, you have to tell everybody when it's the end of a joke, when it's an economics joke, because not everybody thinks it's that funny. But if you like economics and you ever talk to some of the people in economics, you'll get it. I mean, you'll think these are hilarious. Okay, so
it's also known as the dismal science.
The dismal science, yes. Well, I have one more that's funny. These two, they're not economists. These two people are in a balloon. They're taking a balloon ride, and it was one of those things that they just kind of roll them up in the air and then they roll them back down. But the rope breaks, and so they're adrift, and they go up into the clouds and they're drifting around, and suddenly it starts to come down. I guess it's losing some of its heat in the balloon or something. It's starting to come down, and they see this clearing, and there's a man down in the clearing watching them, and they lean down over and they say, "Where are we?" And the man says to him, "You're in a balloon." And just then a big wind comes up and it blows them, away to another place. And the one person turns to the other and says, "That man was an economist." And he says, "How do you know?" "Well, he told you something that was precisely the truth that had no value." Okay. I have some news. I have some good news. One of our listeners, Colby, thank you, Colby, was with the group. They were asking if they knew anybody who could give a speech to their group, which was the Jackson County Americans for Prosperity group. And they wanted somebody who was knowledgeable in Austrian economics. And Colby said, "I know somebody." And he asked me, and I was very honored that Colby thought that much of me to do that. So thank you very much. That was really an honor. And I'm very excited to be asked to do this. And one of them is kind of because it's a little bit of vanity there. But the main reason that it really gets me pumped up that somebody wants to know more about Austrian economics, because Austrian economics is the economics of freedom. It's about individual choice, individual action. It's about free markets and freedom. And that's the more people that want to know about that, the better things are going to be. Because knowing Austrian economics is like having a decoder ring to decode all the propaganda and knowing people are lying, knowing they don't know what they're talking about. And it's great. I'm just pumped up about that. And I can't wait for it. It's going to be at the Medford Library on April 8th. And I don't know the exact time, but as we get closer to that, I'll fill you in. But I hope we have a bunch of new people there that want to come there to listen to me. Or there's supposed to be another speaker there too, maybe to listen to them. But I just think it would be just awesome to get a bunch of people there to learn more about Austrian economics. So if you're a local listener and you want to know more about all this stuff and why I think it's so interesting, I promise you I won't put one graph or chart on a slide. I won't put one mathematical equation. I won't talk about anything about calculus or differential equations or anything like that. It's just going to be about logic and human action and human behavior and why things work the way they do, just using things that people are able to think out for themselves. I think it's a really fascinating subject, economics is, and I hope that I can make it seem that way to you. So, and as time gets closer to the time, I'll have a speech prepared, and I'll probably, the day after I give it, I'll probably post it on our Facebook page. So if you miss it, you can read it there. If you're out of town and want to know about it, you can catch up with it there. Okay, we still have 52 minutes left. Well, I'm going to have to do some stretching here. Okay. I had something that our good friend Colorblind Justice posted a deal in our Facebook page about the man that's running against our current representative in Congress in the Republican primary for the 2nd Congressional District. And we got several likes, including mine. I like Dennis Linthicum. I think he's a very good candidate. To tell you how good I think he is, there's only two political candidates I've ever donated any money to. One of them is Dennis Linthicum, which I've given him some money, some of my money, and the other one was Ron Paul, and that's it. So if that's a recommendation from me, endorsement. But there's three reasons the other reason is I wouldn't necessarily be that excited if Greg Walden was a better representative, but he's really, I don't know, the guy at World Neck Daily, the editor there, he called Greg Walden useless. That was the term he used. And I think he's probably right. I mean, he just seems like he's a room temperature IQ, and he's somehow matriculated to a position way above his level of competence. And I have had 3 face-to-face conversations with Greg Walden in the time that he's been a congressman, and each time I came away thinking, how did this guy get elected? I'm just kind of whispering to myself, I can't believe this guy is a congressman. So I'll just say the least, I wasn't very impressed. I'm going to relate to each of these 3 incidents, and my memory on them is pretty clear because I was fairly focused on what I was what I wanted to say, and they were very important issues to me. And the first incident was shortly after George Bush had been elected president, and George Bush wanted there to be a steel tariff. And he saw that there was I guess he was being petitioned or lobbied by the steel manufacturers in this country, and they wanted a protective tariff that would put a 20% tariff on all imported steel. And they were telling him how many steel manufacturing jobs this would save. But that was just a fallacy. That's when there's a lot of things in this country that other companies use steel to make products for. They use steel to make steel buildings. They use steel girders to build buildings, like skyscrapers. They use steel to make cars. They use steel to make lawnmowers. They make steel to make barbecues. They make steel to make lots of things. And when you put a 20% tariff on imported steel, what happened to the domestically produced steel? Did they just keep their prices down where they were before that tariff went? No, they raised their prices 20% too. So all these things that are made out of steel now cost 20%. The people that are making them in the United States, it costs them 20% more for their raw material than it costs anybody else around the world. That's a huge disadvantage when you're making things like cars. When they're trying to make, I don't know how much, they don't make very much dollars per car. And when suddenly your cost of steel is 20% higher than some guy in Germany, who makes cars, that's going to be a tough nut to crack for you. You might end up like General Motors producing cars at a loss. Now there were other factors involved in that besides the cost of steel. There's their pension program and their healthcare costs were out of sight also, and they had other things that were problematic. But the steel issue was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back, and the fact that General Motors took their bailout money and built a $20 billion car manufacturing facility in China has to tell you something. It tells you that they took the money and ran, I guess. But anyway, I went up to him to voice my complaint on the steel tariff because he had voted for the steel tariff. And so I look at him and says, voting yes on the steel tariff, what were you thinking? This is horrible. And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, well, this saved a lot of steel manufacturing jobs. And I said, were you aware that for every job that was saved in the steel industry, 7 jobs in manufacturing products made out of steel were lost? And he got this quizzical look, kind of like my dog gets when I start talking to him like a person and he can't understand what I'm saying. He tilts his head to the side and puts his ears up, and then he tilts to the other side and puts his ears. Well, he was kind of looking at me like that, and he just kind of made this weak grin and didn't say anything. So that was the first encounter. I wasn't too impressed. The second request was a few years later. Our currency was being debased, and it was being debased in kind of it was kind of a stealth method. They weren't just bailing out people and blatantly creating money out of thin air like they are now. I mean, now compared to what they're doing now, what they were doing then was nothing. But at the time, I thought it was pretty serious, and it was serious to a lot of people around the world. The people that were in the oil business that were drilling for oil, excuse me, especially in the Arab states, they were finding that a few years ago they could sell their oil at $10 or $20 a barrel, and they could buy so much gold with the money they received for it. But now they were selling it for $50 a barrel, $60 a barrel, and they couldn't buy the same amount of gold they used to be able to buy when they were selling it at $20 a barrel. So they were deciding that they just couldn't depend on the U.S. dollar as being a world currency for trade anymore, and they were going to try and set up an exchange where they could actually sell oil for gold directly, and they would countries would have to convert their currencies to gold and ship the gold to those oil-producing countries in order to get their oil. And they thought that was the only way they could preserve their wealth. They thought they were being cheated, which they were. And I read several articles about this, and I was very concerned about it because one of the things that has maintained the U.S. through a period where we really haven't been producing much wealth in this country is the fact that everybody has to use the dollar as their currency for trading allows us to live at a standard of living above what we deserve. And one of the people that was pointing this out and making a big deal about this was he was then a congressman, Ron Paul. And he was pointing out how this was really dangerous to our way of life and our standard of living and everything else. And we needed to have an honest money. We couldn't continue to operate the way we were operating and bailing out crony capitalists with money created out of thin air, because it was going to cause us to lose. We're going to kill the goose that's laying the golden egg. And it's going to cause great problems. So, Mr. Walden was in town he was in town for town meeting, but he also addressed the Rotary Club where I was a member, and I listened to his speech, which was kind of forgettable. After the speech was over, I went up to him and he recognized me from before, and he kind of had this, golly, he's back look on his face. And I asked him what he was doing about the debasement of the U.S. currency. And he got that same look on his face, like my dog gets when he doesn't understand what I'm saying. And he says, well, I don't understand. And so I explained it to him, and I told him that there was a congressman in Congress at that time, Ron Paul he was known in Congress. I'm sure Greg Walden knew who he was, but I think Greg Walden was surprised that I knew who he was. And I told him that he should get with him and have Dr. Paul explain to him why this was going to be a problem and why he should get on the right side of this issue, because if he continued to allow the Federal Reserve to operate the way they were operating, it was going to destroy our economy. And he just stated that he hadn't heard anything about this, and he was sure that everything was going to be okay, and that this was, they just wouldn't do anything like that. It was kind of a general reassurance of somebody that ignorance is bliss. But the actual facts that had transpired since that time, I think this was about 2005 when it happened, when I had this conversation with him. Since then, we've had the overthrow of Gaddafi in Libya, and it is my firm belief that he was taken down because he was going to unhook from the American dollar as a trade currency, and he was going to demand gold for the oil coming out of Libya. And the banksters just couldn't allow that, so they manipulated NATO and the United States into just bombing them back into the Stone Age and destroying all their infrastructure and taking all the gold they could find and killing Gaddafi and turning that country into a burned out mess, what it is now, and just destroying it. Well, that was all something that happened because we continue to devalue our dollar, and Gaddafi knew what was going on. He wasn't a stupid idiot. He was smart enough to run a country. He was smart enough to know he was being swindled. That his oil wouldn't buy as much gold as it used to. And he wanted to make sure that he was getting top dollar for his gold. For his oil, he needed to get it in gold. And so he was ready to introduce gold currency for the Arab world. And they were only going to trade with people who could give them gold. So I'm sure that's what happened. But Greg Walden assured me that everything was going to be okay. Then, I believe this was later that same year, like the first meeting in 2005, it was, I think it was in the spring, and then he came back in late summer, and he was talking, and this could have been I could have the year wrong. This could have been 2004 to 2005. I'm not sure. It was a while ago. And I'm getting older. My memory's not so great of the year. But he came in there to promote a bill that he was trying to push through Congress about a healthy forest bill. I remember what he called it. And he wanted to keep the forest open and produce more timber, but there was no provision in there for cutting the timber. Or there wasn't a provision that could stop injunctions from happening. And injunctions, one person with a typewriter can file an injunction, stop a cut on timberland. So it doesn't take much to do that. And they'll have an injunction until it's too late, and they'll keep them tied up in court until the purchase expires, and then they can't cut it down. And I asked him if there were any stipulations or the guaranteed harvest of the trees to maintain a sustainable economy, or, replant, grow, cut, replant, grow, cut, ad infinitum, so they'd have a timber industry in the Rogue Valley again. And he didn't have an answer to that question either. And then I asked him, well, why don't you work to have the government turn over the stewardship of these public lands to the counties in which they are contained, so that Jackson County could manage its own lands and provide jobs for the people who live there, provide a finished product they could trade with other people around the world in the United States for items that we want to have here in the Rogue Valley, and instead of watching all that timber burn up every summer. and he didn't have an answer for that either. So I think that I agree with the editor of WorldNet Daily that Greg Walden is just kind of useless. I don't think he's a bad person, evil person. He's just kind of useless. And his voting record on freedom issues, the New American rated him at 48%. He is one of the lowest rated Republicans in Congress. The Freedom Works, which is it's not quite as freedom oriented as the New American, they rated him in, I think it's 52%. There must have been one vote that jumped him up there a little bit that the New American didn't agree with. It probably a vote to go to war. So anyway, I'm not a big fan of Congressman Walden, and I'm just wanted to share that with anybody that didn't have time to read it on our Facebook page today. He is also probably the number 6, I think, in the hierarchy of the Republican congressmen. That he's, the speaker's number 1, and there's other people. He's number 6. He's in charge of directing where all the campaign money gets spent in the United States. So they raise money for all the congressmen, and then he gets to decide where it gets to be allocated, so they can put it in wherever. Poor Dennis Linthicum, he's struggling to raise money, and he's going up against a guy that has the ability to put almost unlimited funds into this political campaign. So I've always been to root for the underdog if I liked him, and I really like Dennis Linthicum, and I think that he's a great candidate. He's an Austrian economist. He understands and believes in Austrian economics. He got a degree in economics. It was just regular economics, but he favors the Austrian school as the one that's most correct all the time. And so, on to the next subject. Now, from time to time, we post on our Facebook page an article that I think is just outstanding, and I really urge everybody to read it. And I was very disappointed that few people even saw this. The new deals that Facebook does, if you have 100 people that like our Facebook page, anytime you put something out, 3 of those 100 people will see it. And so you have to do all sorts of different gymnastics to get more than 3 people to look at it. We have about 350 or 360 people. I think it's 365 right now.
Actually, it's 367. We picked up a couple likes today.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
Probably had to do something with ticket sales.
Come on, 500 likes.
Yeah. So for doing that, when we put something up there, our potential is about 12 people. And sometimes that's all we get. 12 people saw it. And I'd like all 360 of them to see something like this, as good as this article was. This was just outstanding. So a guy named Brandon Smith, and he writes a column on Liberty Digest. And he's a young guy, and he's just very smart, really, really, really smart. And he started out as kind of a leftist liberal type, and he was disillusioned by the fact that they weren't getting the results that they were promising. And he said, well, what's going on wrong here? And he started to do his own investigation. As I said, he's a smart guy. And he figured out that a lot of their assumptions and a lot of their things that their tenets of their philosophies were incorrect. They didn't work. And the more he studied it, the more he became, I'm not going to say a conservative, but he became more of a libertarian, because he still held a lot of those individual freedom type of positions that a libertarian would have that a conservative may not. A conservative will respect a lot of the libertarian economic views because they dovetail very closely with their views. But they tend to part ways when it comes to things like drug laws and wars and, let's see, I'm trying to think of something else that they have a real difference of opinion on. Things like NSA spying, just things like that. The libertarians definitely are going to be all about individual rights and liberties, and conservatives are about their causes being free, but maybe trying to limit other people's things that they see as destructive in society. And I think their hearts are in the right place, but they don't realize that when you put government in charge of it, you're not going to accomplish the things that you want to accomplish. That's where their error is trusting government to do those things instead of independently going out there and working to change people's minds through their logic and reasoning and education and things like that. Doing things voluntarily and peacefully.
So what you're saying, Chuck, is it's a matter of statism versus voluntarism or anarchism.
Yeah, it is, and I think that this young man has really turned into an awesome columnist at this Liberty Digest, and I like his columns very much. We posted this, I think, on Monday, maybe it was Tuesday, but I was going to kind of read from it a little bit, just some snippets. At the onset of the derivatives collapse in 2007-2008, it would have been easy to assume that most of America was receiving a valuable education in normalcy bias. In 2006, the amount of ego on display surrounding mortgage investment was so disturbingly grotesque, anyone with any true understanding of the situation felt like projectile vomiting. To watch the smug righteousness of MSNBC and Fox economic pundits as they predicted the infinite rise of American property markets despite all evidence to the contrary was truly mind-blowing. When the whole system imploded, it was difficult to know whether one should laugh or cry. Now, he probably summed up what some people would take maybe 10 or 15 pages in a book to say in one paragraph. And this really is normalcy bias. We get programmed by the things we watch on TV that how many times have I heard this in my life? You can't go wrong buying property. Property always goes up in value. I've heard that. Now, I know for a fact that isn't true because there's been now 3 times in my lifetime where property has gone down in value. The other 2 times it was rather modest decrease and it came back after a short time. This time it was cataclysmic decrease. It was an explosion. They blew the housing market off the map. It still hasn't quite completely recovered, and we are 7 years after the fact. There still is and I'll say this, the inventory of bankruptcies that the banks hold, repossessed homes the banks hold in their portfolios is still there, but it is starting to shrink finally, and that is probably the only good news economic news I've heard in a long time. The fact that it's still there, though, means that it's still there, and it doesn't mean that it's gone away or that its problem's been solved. It means that it's slowly getting better. There's still, if you compare it to a medical patient, there's somebody that's still in critical condition in intensive care, but they're maybe they're not being watched 24 hours with a bedside somebody there because they're not expecting to die at any minute. But it's still a serious situation. It's getting a little bit better. But all my life I've been told that housing was the best investment you could ever make with your dollars, especially owning your own home. And there's a lot of people that bought into that and lost everything they had. How's that a good investment? They were talked into it because of the way we were propagandized to do that. And some big institutions, like some of the big banks, they lost billions of dollars. But the Federal Reserve printed them a bunch of new money and gave it to them. That was just awesome of them to do that. That's about 16 trillion is what I heard, but I don't know. That's just hearsay because the Fed won't let us audit them. So, if you'd taken $16 trillion and you were to have given it to every man, woman, and child in the United States, it would have been somewhere in the neighborhood of $5,000 a person, $20,000 for a family of 4. I just think that would have been money much better spent than the way they did it. It still would have been illegitimate and a horrible thing to do, but just to give it to the richest people on earth seemed to me to be just obscene. Back to Mr. Smith's column. The saddest aspect of this credit crisis in 2008 was not the massive chain reaction of bankruptcies or the threat of institutional insolvency. Rather, it was the delusional assumptions of the public that the grand mortgage casino was going to go on forever. There is nothing worse than witnessing the victim of a Ponzi scheme defend the lie which has ultimately destroyed him. As much as I am for people waking up to the nature of the crisis, there comes a point when those who are going to figure it out will figure it out. The rest of them are essentially helpless. Or, in the case of Congressman Walden, useless. The cultism surrounding the U.S. economy and the U.S. dollar is truly mind-boggling. And by cultism, I mean blind faith in the fiat currency mechanism that goes beyond all logic, reason, and evidence. In recent weeks, it has become more visible as global financiers play both sides of the Ukrainian conflict, luring Americans into a frenzy of false patriotism and an anti-Russo sports team mentality. My personal distaste for Vladimir Putin revolves around my understanding that he is just as much a puppet of the International Monetary Fund and international banks as Barack Obama. But many Americans hate him simply because the mainstream media has designated him the next villain in the fantasy tale of U.S. foreign policy. Now, he goes on to do some other things here, to say some other things. And then he gets into 10 signs that we're in big, big, big trouble. Number 1, Russia will not be alone in its decoupling from the U.S. dollar system. China, our largest foreign creditor, and India, a supposed ally, have clearly sided with Russia on the Ukraine issue. China has stated that it will back Russia's play in the event that sanctions are brought to bear by NATO or if a shooting conflict erupts. That doesn't sound so good. That doesn't make me smile. Number 2, China has already been slowly dumping the dollar as a world reserve currency using bilateral trade agreements with numerous countries, including Russia, India, Australia, Brazil, Germany, Japan. And I might add with Japan, China and Japan have a serious conflict over some islands that are in the ocean between the two countries. And they're both claiming rights to these islands because there's oil there. Or they think there's oil there. And now that deep sea drilling has become, possible, that oil is worth a lot of money, and both China and Japan want it. But even with that disagreement going on, they're making trade agreements and bilateral trade agreements so they can skirt having to use the U.S. dollar because they don't trust it anymore as a way to store wealth at all. And they don't think it's a good way to measure wealth. It's being destroyed by the Federal Reserve. These agreements allow forex currency swaps and export-import purchases to be made with China without the use of the dollar. China has been preparing itself for divorce from U.S. economic dependence for at least a decade. The idea that they would actually follow through over political tension should not surprise anyone if they have been paying attention. Yeah, and remember that China also has control of the Panama Canal, which is a key economic port, transport for getting things from one side of the world to the other. It is the funnel that everything has to pass through unless they want to go around the tip of South America, which is it's much more expensive to do it that way. Or they can go around the back way and go around Africa and sail in the back way, that way. Both those ways are much longer routes and take a lot longer time. So China they've been positioning themselves to be power brokers in the world for a long time. That happened, by the way, the Panama Canal going to Chinese control happened during the Carter administration, in case any of you weren't alive during that time. A total drop of the dollar or U.S. Treasury bonds by Russia and China would send shockwaves through global markets. This is number 3. Russia is a major energy supplier for most of Europe. China is the largest export-import nation in the world. If they refuse to accept dollars as trade mechanism, numerous countries will fall in line to abandon the greenback as well. The fact that so many Americans refuse to acknowledge this reality is a recipe for disaster. This is exactly what I was talking to Representative Walden about 10 years ago. And he had no clue. The only advantage the U.S. has traditionally offered in terms of international trade has been the American consumer, whose unchecked debt spending partly fueled the rise of industrialized East, not to mention the biggest credit bubble in history. The role of America as a consumer market is collapsing today, however. The mainstream media and the Federal Reserve can blame the steady decline in retail sales on the weather all they want, but negative indicators in global manufacturing often take many months to register in the statistics, meaning this destabilization began long before the days turned cold. Number 4, China has been shifting away from export dependency since at least 2008, calling for a larger consumer-based market at home. This process of enriching the Chinese consumer has almost been completed. The lie that China needs the U.S. in order to survive economically needs to be thrown out like the utter propaganda that it is. Number 5, China and most of the world have ended new dollar purchases for their forex reserves, and they have no plan to make new purchases in the future. Number 6, China executed the largest dump of U.S. Treasury bonds in history in the past month. Number 7, Russia, China, and numerous other countries, including U.S. allies, have been calling for the end of the dollar as a world reserve status and the institution of a new global basket currency using the IMF's special drawing rights. Even Putin has suggested that the IMF take over administration of the global economy since the SDR as a world currency system and issue the SDR as a world currency system. Now, the IMF is still kind of run by the Fed or the U.S. government, so I don't know if they really mean that. I think that's just a transitory thing till they're perfectly ready to do whatever they want to do. The Federal Reserve has been creating trillions of dollars in fiat just to prop up U.S. markets since 2008. We are still seeing a considerable decline in global manufacturing, retail, personal home sales, and a general malaise in consumer demand. Without a full audit, there is no way to know how much currency has been generated or how much is floating around in foreign markets. Any loss of world reserve status would send that flood of dollars back into the U.S., most likely ending in a hyperinflationary environment. Yeah, we can see some trillion-dollar bills. Another dubious argument I see is often the claim that Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury could simply negate a Treasury dump by refusing to acknowledge creditor liabilities, or that they could simply print what they need to snap up the bonds, much like the German government tried during the Weimar collapse. I know how to say that. Unfortunately, this plan did not work out so well for the Germans, hyperinflation, nor has it worked out for any other nation in history, so I'm not sure why people think the U.S. could pull it off. However, it's this kind of cultism we are surrounded by. These folks think the U.S. economy and the dollar are untouchable. Yes, the Fed and the Treasury could hypothetically erase existing liabilities, but what dollar cultists do not seem to grasp, the dollar's value is not built on Treasury purchases. The value is built on faith and reputation. If a nation refuses to pay out its debts, this is called default. If they pay it out with money that isn't worth anything, it's still a default, even though they technically paid it. Finally, it is unwise to operate on the assumption that foreign creditors will accept dollars as payment on U.S. Treasury bonds if they believe the Federal Reserve is monetizing the debt, which they are. When Weimar imploded under the weight of its currency devaluation, many foreign governments refused to accept the German mark as payment. Instead, they demanded the payment in raw commodities like coal, lumber, and ore. And China will probably demand payment in mining rights in the Siskiyou Mountains in what is now an area that is going to try and be the Jefferson Republic. And they would try and extract trillions of dollars in mineral wealth from these mountains that our own government is preventing us from mining and accessing. Well, actually, in California, it's the state government. But there's a lot of mining regulations out there that make it very difficult to mine. But China wouldn't care about that. They would just come in and take it. Number 10, most Treasury holdings in foreign coffers are not long-term bonds. Rather, they are short-term bonds which mature in weeks or months instead of years. Dollar proponents constantly cite the continued accumulation of Treasury bonds by other governments as a sign that dollar is still as desirable as ever. Unfortunately, they have failed to look at the nature of these bond purchases. When China rolls over millions in short-term bonds and replaces them with other short-term bonds, This does not suggest they have much faith in America's long-term ability to service its debt. It just means that they are getting rid of what they can get rid of, and they roll over the rest of them because they don't want to dump them all at once because it will crush the market. And they know it. They're trying to get as much as they can out of it. So they sell a little bit at a time. Number 11, China is on the fast track to becoming the largest holder of physical gold in the world. Russia has also greatly expanded its gold purchases. In America, we no longer own any gold. Fort Knox is empty. Whatever losses these governments might suffer from a dump of their treasury bond investments, it will more than be made up in the incredible explosion in precious metal prices that will follow. Number 12, the most common argument against the dollar losing world reserve status has been that such a shift would be impossible because no other currency in the world has the adequate liquidity needed to replace the dollar in global trade. These people have apparently not been paying attention to the Chinese yuan. The Chinese have been quietly issuing trillions in yuan denominated in bonds, securities, and currency around the world. Current estimates calculate around 24 trillion created by the PBOC, that's the People's Bank of China, and the banks under its control. Mainstream talking heads are calling this a debt bubble. However, this debt creation makes perfect sense if China's plan is to create enough liquidity in its currency in order to offer a viable alternative to the US dollar. Linking to the yuan in the IMF's basket currency would complete the picture, forming a perfect dollar replacement while economists stand dumbstruck. That wouldn't be a new thing. So those were 12 points that I think it was Brandon Smith brought up about the impending doom of our fiscal system and our dollar. And I think that's probably an essay that you guys should find on our Facebook page. Go to the link, bookmark it, and refer to it from time to time to see if this guy didn't write just about one of the best columns of the year to date. And maybe it will still be one of the best columns of the year in December 31st. It was awesome. It explains exactly how deep we are in deep kimchi, and we are way deep in it. And not only is there no way out, but we seem to be going to the deeper and deeper ends of this trap that has no way out, so that when it does get closed in on us, we're going to be in worse shape than we would be if we just tried to salvage what we can now. This is really serious. It's bad news. And Drew, do you have anything to add to all that? I don't know. I'm not the best reader of stuff. I misread a couple sentences, but I think I got it all out.
I was trying to find that link to throw it in the chat, so I was surfing through our Facebook page here. But the other side of this issue is if Russia chooses to sell dollars, we'll collapse the Federal Reserve note and cause some major problems and potentially financial collapse. That we've been talking about for a long time, and then you have these trade sanctions, that are being put into place. And as we've discussed on prior episodes, trade wars lead to real wars. So
yep.
The potential is there, and it's just looking like World War III more and more every day, it seems. On another note, I wanted to point out something that's been bothering me. There was that electrical substation that was allegedly taken out by snipers almost a year ago. Where was that? Down in California?
Yeah.
And then only recently it's being talked about and hyped, trying to scare people that the power grid is not secure. And then today I noticed a Wall Street Journal article that said the U.S. could be in the dark if a small-scale attack knocked out just 9 of the country's 55,000 electric transmission substations, a federal analysis says. And they got a map of the grid, which really doesn't look like a grid. It's not not all like a grid, but this is just, it's like they're trying to hype something that's a threat that isn't really a threat, but they're going to make it a threat, and I see it as the next false flag, or a way to. I'm not quite sure how they're gonna do this. Maybe folks in chat can help us out a bit, but they're gonna use this to try to either reduce energy demand or increase security in some way. Either way, you're going to get less, and it's going to cost you more. And I'm thinking that that's really what this is all about: is jacking up the power prices and making you pay more and get less out of it. But I don't know if we're going to see brownouts, rolling blackouts, like Enron did in California. Remember that?
Yeah, I did a parody of California Dreamin' when that happened. I said, let's see, how's it go? All the lights are brown and the governor is gray. And it was pretty funny. I can't remember all the things about. All the lights are brown and the governor is Gray Davis was the governor, so that's
yes. Right.
So if you have to explain the jokes, they really aren't funny. But they were having rolling brownouts.
Well, they engineered a shortage. There wasn't really a power shortage, but they were kind of like, the Master Blaster guy on Mad Max Escape from Thunderdome. That was the one with Tina Turner in it. It was the guy that had the methane production facility, Master Blaster, and he'd call the embargo and he'd go, "Who owns Bartertown?" And and the answer was always Master Blaster, or "Who controls Bartertown?" Whatever. But it's like that kind of a game, so where big energy, is going to assert its power. So I just I want to keep moving more and more toward going off grid. Tonight I have a spreadsheet that I use that I plug numbers into to see what I can run on my existing solar power, and then I forecast out like what I would need to run other things, and making trade-offs, and then thinking about solutions, like refrigeration is always a challenge, and do
you have natural gas there?
Yeah, I have natural gas, but what I'd like to do is
I want to be off that grid too.
Yeah, I'd like to get completely off grid. I'd like to have a rocket mass heater, especially for the farm, and so that's something I'm working on. But for in a commercial building, it's challenging, and I'd like to put some more energy into this topic in the future, which is the fact that the local fire departments don't recognize the Fourth Amendment, as it applies to business owners, and they just walk into businesses and tell you what to do, and they inspect your place without a warrant, and then write you a punch list of stuff that you have to do. It's completely unconstitutional, and frankly, I'm getting pretty sick of it. But one of the things I'd like to have is a rocket mass heater, but there aren't codes for that, in our town. Up in Portland, they actually put together a building code so people could actually construct, legal rocket mass heaters, and so
Yeah, see, but in Ashland, they're not going to be doing that because they own the electric. They'd be reducing their revenues by letting people unhook off the grid. So they're going to try and make it as hard as possible to do that.
Perhaps they will, and then the key would be just to embarrass them. And frankly, I'd like to just see people just build them anyway, in mass civil disobedience. But really, I think most people won't do that. And so if you could just, have a standard on the books, it would actually encourage people to build them, which would encourage people to get off the grid as much as possible. So, I don't know. I don't know if I want to be the guy that spearheads this project or not, because it's just way too statist for me, you know. I'm tempted just to build one, but I know the fire marshal will just come in and like make me tear it out, you know, if I do it in a commercial application. It's just really it's really a shame.
You remember the old In Living Color, when you do the fire marshal Rick or whatever his name was.
Oh, Fire Marshal Bill. Let me show you something.
Let me show you this.
Let me show you something.
Yeah, that was. You had to get a little video of that, and every time they show up, just turn that on. So, I was just watching something on YouTube. I think the best way to get these people's attention is to make fun of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, I said to this fire inspector recently, I said, well, can I come over to your house and inspect your garage and write you a punch list for $500 worth of repairs and give you a bill for the inspection? And he just looked at me like, what are you talking about? I was like, that's what you're asking of me. You know, is it okay if I do the same to you? You know, if I could violate your rights? You know, he was speechless. He didn't know what to say. He never thought about it. You know, I showed him that he was a tyrant. He thought he was just being helpful and keeping the community safe.
Yeah, it's part of the propaganda, brainwashing, the normalcy bias thing.
He's really just a Stasi. You know, he's Stasi in the USSA. I'm really sick and tired of it. It's just one more burden that the businesses have to put up with. I mean, these guys, they go through your closets, you know, they go through everything, you know, and they go, oh, you got an extension cord. You need to use a surge protector, you know, and just go through with all this stuff telling you what to do. They've got no right to come into a private building and do these things. There's no right whatsoever. You know, they're government. They're government agents.
That's also part of this regulatory bureaucracy. They have judicial laws, administrative laws that allow them to do this, and they're not passed by any elected body at all. They just put them on there, and maybe they're trying to be absolutely honest, but I tell you, there's a lot of people that benefit from fixing your place and making it come up, you know, filling out his punch list or whatever. And so they can write these things to catch people on certain things that they'll be able to benefit from replacing them for you. So, you know, they make it it's kind of like a shakedown. Mm-hmm. That's what it amounts to. And
yeah. And then the governments talk about trying to do things to create jobs and things like that. Well, you know, it comes back to regulation. You know, and when you create regulations like this and you're burdening business, you're going to get the opposite effect. You know, and they think that they're protecting property, that they're really being tyrants. And like in the city of Ashland, you know, it used to be they'd inspect like retail and office buildings, and then they ramped it up to multifamily housing of like 4 or greater units or something like that, which is really pushing it, because then they're actually inspecting people's homes. They're rented homes. It's still a leasehold estate, which is a form of ownership. Just because you rent something doesn't mean you don't have a form of ownership. You do. You have a leasehold estate.
Well, yeah. I mean, in Oregon, because we have property taxes, nobody ever owns their property. You have,
but I'm saying is as far. Sorry about that. As far as your rights go,
yeah.
You know, that's your property, and you're protected by the Fourth Amendment. Yet they think they could still come in, you know, and inspect private residences, and then they just ramped it up recently to commercial and industrial buildings, which they'd never done before. But now they've got the time, and this is all because they're more and more. Oh, that's funny, Cracker. Douche badges, yes. That's excellent. But they, you know, as these governments get more computerized and the databases get connected together, you know, and they start sharing primary keys across these databases, you know, the tyranny is easier to inflict. You know, they have access to more and more data, and and they could inflict their tyranny with ever greater efficiency. And we really need to unplug these guys from the internet, because they're just able to share way too much data and are getting way too efficient, and they're not using it to cut costs. They're using it to
increase scrutiny.
More scrutiny, more regulation. It instead of being efficient and reducing the cost of government, it's created more government. And I've seen charts that show public sector employment versus private sector employment, and one goes up and one goes down, and you can guess which is which. And there's a reason,
Mm-hmm.
There's an inverse correlation there.
Yeah. Well, I want to remind everybody that, especially if you live in the Jackson-Josephine County area or Siskiyou County, to contact one of us and get involved with moving these ticket sales, because we really want this to succeed. I really feel a sense of urgency for having a place to go and live and be free when the shit hits the fan, which I think is going to happen. Well, it's going to happen soon. It's I'm not saying I've got 10 years or 5 years like I was saying it could be last year. I could have been thinking it could be as long as that. I'm not saying that anymore. I think it's less than 2 years and maybe this year. There's so many factors that could come into play that would just crash our economy almost instantly. And if you've ever studied the history of hyperinflation, it doesn't happen over a couple of years. It happens over 3 or 4 months, and suddenly you can't stop it, and it's just going until it collapses. And it's scary. In the Weimar Republic in Germany, it took 10 months. In Zimbabwe, it took 10 or 11 months. And they start out with, things just it's kind of like the deal with, they say the guy who works for the king in Egypt, and he wants to get paid, and the king says, "What do you want?" He says, "Well, I want to start with 1 grain of wheat on this square on the checkerboard, and every square you're going to double that amount of wheat." And the king goes bankrupt before he gets halfway through so much. That's kind of how it is. That's how it is. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thank you, Jules. See you next week.
You're bound to break.